The red and blue lights hit my rearview mirror before the engine of that patrol car even finished growling up behind me, and right then, I knew exactly what this was about. Not speeding, not a broken tail light, not a missed signal. No, this was about me, about who he thought I was, the second he saw my face behind the wheel of a car he didn't think I belonged in. And believe me, that look he gave me when he stepped out of his cruiser. I'd seen it my whole life, you know what I mean? I pulled over, slow, calm hands on the wheel like I was back in driver's ed, and I remember thinking, well, Chief, looks like day 3 on the job is about to get real interesting, and yeah, that happened. See, when I took the position as police chief in this city, I didn't walk in wearing rose-colored glasses. I'd read the federal reports, the internal reviews, the complaints that had been stacking up for years, like unopened bills on a kitchen counter, hundreds of people saying the same thing in different words, that they'd been stopped for no reason, questioned like suspects, searched like criminals, all because an officer decided they looked out of place, and most of those complaints went nowhere, dismissed, filed, forgotten, but patterns don't lie. People just pretend they don't see them. So I decided if I was going to lead this department, I needed to see it myself, not from a desk, not from a briefing, but from the driver's seat. I took my own car, the white Maserati I'd bought after 20 years of overtime shifts, security jobs, and nights where sleep felt like a rumor, and I drove straight through the districts where complaints were highest, obeyed every law like it was sacred scripture, speed limit, locked in turn, signals, crisp radio low, just waiting to see who would decide I didn't belong. First day I got pulled over once. Officer walked up, polite but nervous. Couldn't explain why he stopped me. I showed him my ID. He nearly swallowed his tongue, apologizing. I made a note in his file but didn't punish him because there's a difference between a mistake and a mindset. Second day, another stop, same story, different badge. But the third day, that's when I met Officer Mercer. He lit me up fast like he'd been waiting for a car like mine his whole shift. I eased over, shut the engine off, hands visible, and when he walked up I could already feel it, that tension, that assumption hanging in the air before either of us spoke. He didn't greet me, didn't ask if I knew why I was stopped. He just said, license, registration, proof of ownership, voice sharp like he'd already decided I was lying about something. I looked up at him calm and said, afternoon, officer, can you tell me why you pulled me over? He didn't answer, just repeated the demand louder like volume could replace reason. I handed him my documents, slow, deliberate, and he studied them like they were counterfeit bills. This your car? He asked. Yes, sir, that's what the registration says. Then he hit me with it, the question I'd heard in a dozen forms over the years. How do you afford something like this? Not what law did you break? Not where are you headed, just how can someone like you have something like this? I told him that wasn't a legal question, asked again what violation justified the stop, and you could see it in his face. He didn't like being questioned, didn't like not being in control. So he said, step out of the vehicle. I asked if I was being detained. He said, step out or I'd be arrested. I asked, arrested for what? And he leaned closer, voice low and tight. I'm the one asking questions. Now right there I had a choice. Refuse and escalate or comply and observe, and I chose to step out slow, hands visible, telling him clearly I did not consent to any search, but he patted me down anyway, found nothing. Of course, then said he was going to search the car. I reminded him he didn't have probable cause. He smirked and opened the passenger door anyway. Went through the glove box, console, under the seats, movements getting rougher. Each second he didn't find what he expected, like the car itself was insulting him, and then he walked to the trunk. Inside was a leather briefcase. He opened it, pulled out the first document. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched his shoulders stiffen, watched the color drain from his face as the words sank in. Termination notice. His name, his badge number, reason, unlawful stop, unconstitutional search pattern of biased policing, signed by me. He looked up, slow blinking like his brain needed a second opinion. You're the chief, he asked. Yes, I said, calm as still water, and you just failed the test. I swear you could hear his heartbeat from where I stood. He started talking fast, saying he didn't know, saying he was just doing his job, saying the car looked suspicious, and I told him no, what he was doing was what he thought he could get away with, and that's when it really hit him, because deep down he knew. I called for a supervisor, and when the sergeant arrived and saw me standing there, she didn't even ask twice. I explained what happened. She turned to him and asked if it was true, and he said the same thing again, that he didn't know who I was, and she told him that didn't matter because it didn't. Right there on the roadside, he handed over his badge, then his weapon, hands shaking like he'd stepped into winter without a coat. 2 hours later, I had every command officer in a conference room watching his body cam footage play on a projector screen. No commentary, no speeches, just the raw video, his voice, my voice, the silence between. When it ended, nobody spoke. Finally, one captain asked if I'd set him up, and I said I drove legally on a public street. If that's a setup, then every citizen sets you up every time they leave home. No one argued after that. The next morning, I held a press conference and released the footage publicly because transparency isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. And within hours, it was everywhere. News stations, headlines, commentators arguing both sides. Some saying I did the right thing, others saying I embarrassed him. 6 weeks later, the union challenged the termination, claiming entrapment, but the arbitrator reviewed everything and upheld the decision without hesitation, said clearly there was no legal basis for the stop, no justification for the search, and a documented pattern that proved it wasn't an isolated incident. Mercer tried getting hired elsewhere, but every background check told the same story, and no department wanted that liability. Meanwhile, inside our department, things started changing. Every stop now required documented justification. Body cam footage got randomly audited. Officers with disproportionate stop patterns got flagged for retraining or review, and within a year, complaints dropped dramatically. Community meetings stopped sounding like grievance sessions and started sounding like conversations. Trust didn't magically appear, but it started growing slow and real. 5 years later, the department's used as a national example of reform. And me, I still drive that Maserati not as a test anymore, just as a reminder. Because here's the truth, most people don't like saying out loud. Bias doesn't vanish when you ignore it. It settles in, gets comfortable, starts calling itself procedure. Some folks still argue about what I did. They say I trapped him, that I pushed him into making a mistake. Others say all I did was give him the chance to show who he already was. And honestly, I understand both reactions because accountability can feel like punishment when you're not used to it. But I'll tell you this, driving an expensive car while black is not a crime. Asking why you're being stopped is not resistance, and the Constitution isn't optional depending on who's watching. I didn't fire him because he stopped me. I fired him because of how and why he did it, and because the pattern said he'd do it again to someone who didn't have a badge in their pocket. So now I want to ask you something straight. If you were in my position, would you have handled it the same way, or would you have let it slide and hoped it fixed itself? Have you ever been judged before you even spoke, or seen it happen to someone else? Tell me what you think. I really want to hear your take, because conversations like this matter. And the only way things change is when people stop whispering about injustice and start talking about it out loud.